Hi, and welcome to the I Teach Myself podcast. My name is Matthew Miniman, and this is episode 31. Time. Time is important for a lot of reasons. It tells you when you need to go to bed, when you need to wake up. It causes your dogs to need you to get up and let them out to go pee. Time forever crawls on. Time is the most persistent warrior. Time. Time is important to computers as well. Time is actually very important in a lot of reasons. Not just the fact that you need to have the right time on your computer so that when you look at it, you know what time it is. Saying, you've wasted 15 minutes playing Minesweeper instead of actually working. You need to have time accurate on your computer for a lot of reasons. There are certain kinds of attacks that are called free after use conditions, or they're also race conditions. And basically these are set up as attacks where if an attacker times their exploitation properly, they can gain access and control a computer. So time is important in that sense as well. But time also has a very direct impact on your device. Your device tells time very, very accurately, down to, I think it is I think it's even past the microsecond at this point. I think it's the picosecond. I think they tell time down to the picosecond. And it is important that your computer know exactly what time it is, because time is kind of like the sense that allows your computer. It is the single most important thing that allows your computer to tell where it's at, basically. If you were to think about how your sense of where you're at works, you as a human being can tell where you're at because you know where you've been, kind of. You'll be, if you've ever woken up from sleepwalking or anything like that, it's really hard to tell how you got to where you're at, and it's hard to tell where you're at immediately if you don't know where you were. And a way that a computer knows where it's at is by time. If time changes, it can severely fuck up where a computer thinks it is in the process, in a data send, in a lot of things. And so time is one of those things that needs to be nearly exact. And it is important for you to set it appropriately. When you have a computer, you can set the time manually. If you have Windows, you can set it manually. And it didn't used to be so easy. You would way back when 286, I'm dating myself, 386, you had to go into the BIOS and set the time manually. Now, back then it wasn't so important for a computer to know exactly what time it was, simply because it didn't talk to anything else. So it didn't have any reason to be able to reference what time it was. But you still had to work really hard to get it set, or at least a lot harder than you do right now. And time is integral because it has to know what comes before and what comes after. One of the things that computers look at and calculate is this thing called epoch time. And epoch time is set to midnight of January 1st, 1970. That date is specific because that's the year that Microsoft was founded, and so on and so forth. But epoch time is basically the number of seconds or milliseconds or picoseconds that have occurred since that point in time. And there is an incrementing number stored in a lot of memory caches where that is the case. And you may have heard of a problem. If you've been in IT long enough, you may have heard of a problem called the 2035 problem. And what this problem is that devices that have a limited memory region for time, they typically limit that to, I believe it's either 32 or 64 bits. But when 2035 rolls around, it's actually a specific date. I think it's something like June 6th, 2035. When that date rolls around, any device that has that has this memory region problem for time will do what we call an integer overflow, where the number now is so big that it resets. And so what happens when that resets is that the device thinks it's 1970 instead of 2035, and the device now cannot work in a network because it doesn't know where it's at. It doesn't have any idea of what's going on. And so these are kind of reasons why time is important, because you have to be able to tell everything around you what time it is. Let's put it another way. If somebody came from the past into the future and started talking to you like it was 1970, you would be utterly confused, wouldn't you? Well, it's the same thing that computers would be. If one computer starts talking to another like it's 1970, they're gonna get confused. They're gonna be like, "Oh, whoa, man, we need you to, need you to chill out and relax. We didn't just land on the moon. You need to figure yourself out. Disco is not a thing." you would tell this person to go seek help, and you would avoid talking to them because it's obvious that they're crazy. And that's essentially what happens to computers as well. If a computer has the wrong date and time, then other computers basically refuse to talk to it. There's a little bit more that goes into it than that, because since time is so important to computers, one of the things that occurs is a device will, when it sends information to another computer, it will send along the date time stamp of that communication. It'll send it in a format that the target computer can read. Typically, it's epoch time. And that helps the computer understand where in the sequence of communication that message is supposed to travel along. So in the realm of networking and the internet and talking to computers, if you think about how much data is transferred, let's just use in a movie. If you're streaming a video, there's an immense amount of data that happens and occurs in the background. Now, we're not talking like immense on the scale of your internet usage, but we're talking big in the sense of it's like a meg. It's like 16 full-length novels that are being written with every movie that you stream, with every video that you stream. It's like a mega data, or several megs of data that are synced, that are sent, that are basically what you would consider trash data. And these are things like timestamp data, so that the computers talking back and forth know in what sequence the communication they're getting is supposed to occur in. Because if you send just a bunch of data at somebody, they're going to see certain things before others, and they're not going to know exactly what order they came in if it came in too quickly. So computers operate at a level which they send that communication stream in. They send the order basically with the timestamp, and that allows the receiving computer to go, okay, I can put these in order, so that way I know exactly what the communication is supposed to look like. That is all part of the communication process inside of the internet. And that is one of the reasons why time is so important. So that you know how to order this communication and you don't get confused. Because if your clock is off by a millisecond and you're sending data, you may send data out of order, and the receiving computer may not be able to understand or translate the data appropriately. And that's why it's really important. And so, there have been problems where, like, if you send data with a computer whose clock is not accurate, or whose clock is kind of flipping out, you will have issues with the communication and the data stream. There are also some attacks that occur from this. You can have basically attacks that can replay data, or that can manipulate data in time. It's actually how a not inconsiderable amount of gaming hacks work, is that they utilize some sort of time-based attack to send packets before the packets are supposed to be received, so that the hacker can leverage a specific function in the game. So time is extremely important in these circumstances, because that's how these things are performed, and that's how that's how we keep track of all this data. That's how computers keep track of it all. So what do we do with time? How do we make sure that time is appropriately being told between computers? Well, so one of the things that we have to do in order to make sure that all computers are synced across time is we have to all agree on what the time is. We kind of have to all agree on that. And we can't just kind of say, "Oh, well, sun is there. That's what time it is." We can't say that. We have to know exactly what time it is. And this is why when you hear about earthquakes, large earthquakes, or other phenomenon that happen to the earth, this is why you hear news articles referencing that they had to move the clocks back a second or a half second or a millisecond or things like that. It's actually extremely important that we know exactly what time it is, because that is how this is how all of our computers are generated. Another example of time usage in this circumstance is global positioning systems, GPS. They work off of the concept of triangulation based off of time. You won't send anything to the satellites. What will happen is your GPS device will receive the signal from the satellites in space. What they're receiving is time. It is the timestamp at that moment from these GPS satellites, and it requires at least 3 GPS satellites to do this. So what happens is you receive the timestamp from 3 GPS satellites. The satellites also send their communication data, or your phone understands, or whatever your device understands, which satellite is sending the data, and then that allows that device to triangulate their data using very complicated math to figure out where you are on the planet down to a certain point. The more accurate the time stamp, the more accurate your location is. That's why they say that GPS can identify your location within a specific time frame, because the more accurate the time between the satellites, the more accurate your location data is going to be. And so time, super important for that shit, right? Like, if you didn't have any accurate time on your phone, you wouldn't know where the fuck you were. Your phone wouldn't be able to tell you where you were, because it's receiving the data from 3 different satellites and has no idea how to calculate that data based off the time if it has inaccurate time. And so how do we agree what time it is? How do these satellites understand what time it is? There is a service out there. It's called Network Time Protocol, NTP, and there are several different servers on the internet that utilize this. In fact, there are a ton that are offered for free by just a ton of different organizations. These are nonprofit organizations operating time servers across the planet. There's a few scattered around the United States. There's a few scattered around other places. And in fact, if you have a definite quality of time, you can host your own NTP server, your own Network Time Protocol server, and put it into what we call the Network Time Protocol pool. And what these Network Time Protocol servers do is they basically just allow computers to ring them back and say, "Hey, what time is it? I think I might be off." And then your computer adjusts time based on what the Network Time server says. And that is how those NTP servers work. That's how the whole NTP protocol and system works. It allows your computers to reference what time it may be exactly. So when we talk about time and when we're referencing time and we want to enforce time, we have to reference these NTP servers. Now, computers today don't necessarily have too big of an issue with keeping track of time. A lot of them, most of them are really good with keeping track of time. But there are exceptions. I don't know if many of you have this issue, but I used to drive several vehicles where I would set the time, and they'd have that little dashboard clock or whatever on them, and I would set the time. But every time I turned on the engine, the time would pause for just like not even a half second, but it would be really quick. But eventually, over a series of over a usage period of a year, you go back and that clock is now off by 10 or 15 minutes. It's now behind. And the same thing can happen with devices and computers. As they're being used, as their main processor is being taxed and things like that, it can reduce the amount of CPU or frequency that the time is checked, and that time can then get out of sync with what is actually supposed to be there. So it is important that you use a third-party external source for your time. Most computers today, most networking equipment today is force synced to a network time pool just by default. Most of it is. That's not to say that it's a guarantee, but most of it is. But when you are crafting a network or building an environment for your organization, one of the things that you do need to consider is, how are you going to sync time? Are you just going to have everything synced to the internet for time? Are you going to run your own internal time server, which is then synced outside, or you're just going to run time internally, entirely independently? Those are all considerations you have. The danger with running internal time protocol servers and not referencing anything outside of the internet is that the internet will still operate on its own time. And so you are effectively making an island of yourself. And you can create a scenario where eventually, once your time becomes out of sync with the rest of the internet, you lose the ability to communicate with the rest of the internet. In fact, there are a lot of websites that have protections against time-based attacks where they will effectively shut down any communication. I think Google does this, where they don't necessarily shut down communication, but they put any access to their sites behind a verify that you're human check, because that communication is now immediately suspicious because the time isn't right. So this is all very important, and it is very important for you and your organization to consider when delivering all of this. Now, 99% of organizations that are not military-based or do not deal with sensitive time data, most of you don't even realize that you're syncing your time off of servers, and most of you probably don't really realize that there's anything going on with time. So this is probably a big spot of news for you. But if you do happen to have any issues where you randomly are getting kicked off the internet, or you continue to have problems connecting to specific websites, you might want to check your clock. You might want to see if your time is accurate. Because without that, everything else just kind of falls apart. That's all I got, guys. Hope you have a great day.